Gavin Newsom has become in many ways the distilled symbol of a certain American paradox, the polished face of decline, the smiling architect of disorder, the elegant salesman for policies that hollow out the very civilization he claims to defend.
Victor Davis Hanson has spoken about California for years, but when he talks about Gavin Newsom,
When people ask me why Gavin Newsom matters, I tell them that he is not merely a governor. He is a prototype, a preview of what a post-constitutional, post-accountability America might look like if the political class continues on its present trajectory.
the tone changes, it sharpens, it tightens, it becomes something closer to a warning than an analysis.
Newsom presents himself as the avatar of a new America, sleek, affluent, curated, insulated, the perfectly tailored suit, the rehearsed indignation, the rhetoric of compassion weaponized to justify policies that erode public order.
Hanson sees Newsom not just as a governor, but as a symbol, a preview of a political future.
You know what I think he's going to do? I think he's going to stop biological men, transgendered athletes from dominating women's sports. He's just going to ban them. I do. And I think, you know what? We're going to go from 10,000 illegal entries per day to none. And we're going to be fewer illegal entries in the first 10 months than in any time since 1970, in over a half century. I think he's going to do all that. And you'd say, Victor, 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 what are you drinking on your farm? It's impossible. So yeah, I think he's done very well, and that's what I wanted to point out. But it was in the context, as I started the column, of there's a lot of verbiage, you know, there's the ICE raids, there's the fascist Trump, the, Gavin Newsom with his, have you noticed this little quiggly thing he does now with his hands? Like he's a puppet. It's weird. But that stuff, there's all this, Trump is trying to troll them.
He believes America is not prepared to confront.
He was saying, you see, the subtext of what he was saying was, we're trying to change the demography of the United States. Look, you understand? And we feel a more secure America is a more diverse America. So we have managed to let in 10, 12,000 a day. And we've got 2 million a year entries, and we will get 8 to 12 million people. And that is going to make a more secure America. It's going to be diverse. Now we're going to muss up our hair a little bit with some, millions of people on public assistance, and you might not get into your dialysis appointment with illegals, and we might have a little extra, pedophilia or rapes, but that's collateral damage. But the border is not only secure, it's enhancing the diversity of America.
He represents the aesthetic of confidence and the reality of dysfunction.
I've got 21% below the poverty line living here. Hey, everybody, I got 1/3 of all the welfare. I got electric rates up to 40 cents a kilowatt. We've spent $20 billion on high-speed rail. I can claim that I guarantee we haven't made 1 foot of rail yet. Not 1 foot under my watch. I oversaw 2 big fires that destroyed all of Pacific Palisades and some of Arcadia. I did that. And I can top that. We have the highest gas prices in the United States. I'm getting all the refineries out.
Gavin Newsom is the distilled essence of California's decline.
It does 2 things. It doesn't just destroy meritocracy, but it encourages people to use criteria other than empiricism to go for an agenda, that you can do almost anything by a DEI argument. You can say, I didn't get the job because of this. The job wasn't done. I didn't come to class because of this. The bomb didn't hit the target because of this. The plane crashed. It wasn't my fault because of this. It's like Marxism in the Soviet Union. It really was an ideological shelter for people to flee to who were incompetent.
The contrast, he argues, defines every major decision Newsom has made.
It's going to be very good for black people, anybody who's not white. It's going to be wonderful, because if you truly get rid of it, you will see, I think, some really wonderful people who will compete fine in the meritocratic field of ideas and performance, and then nobody will be able to say, as a lot of people did, Karine Jean-Pierre was that brilliant press secretary because she was black.
Yeah.
No, they're not going to be able to say that. But when you look at her, or Kamala Harris, you ask yourself, do the Democratic Party have a more competitive vice president as a future president than Kamala Harris? Or is that the level of word salad they all had?
Smooth speeches, perfect hair, precision messaging, but paired with a state collapsing under its own contradictions.
I'm a soldier in the ranks of the anti-Trump army, and I'm just going to issue this stuff. And by the time it winds its way into the appellate circuit judge, where we have a 50-50 chance of liberal judges, Trump will be eaten up. With all the things he's done, it's not just, the surveilling, that it will be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months that we will stop the Trump engine. And then and we might, even if we get, a positive circuit, they'll appeal. It'll have to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So I will have initiated a chain reaction in various ways. And more importantly, I will encourage other liberal 350 of the 700 some judges. I will encourage them to see if they can match my status, notoriety, and effective delaying tactics.
Hanson points to homelessness, to taxes, to the exodus of businesses, to the flight of the middle class.
And on your right, on the ocean side, the beach side, there's nothing being rebuilt. And it's very strange because here and there you see a house that survived in some brush, and then you see these vast swaths on the hillsides of burn. But then you ask yourself, how could a house on the hill survive, and then the fire jumps over from the hill and then goes over four lanes of freeway, the PCH, and then goes into houses that are sitting with no vegetation whatsoever on the beach when there's this moist ocean air? And the answer is that the winds came out of the hills. They blew embers. The embers skipped over and leapfrogged and hopscotched over places that were saved, and they landed on places that were vulnerable and wouldn't.
These aren't accidents, he said. They're the logical outcome of a governing philosophy that prizes symbolic virtue over physical reality.
There's, to a naked eye and an inexperienced person with the LA area, there's just no rebuilding, it looks like, at all. And are people going to be shocked when they're told that the fire department went out and they arrested the arsonist who they were spotted lighting fires? They put out the original fires, and then the fires had burned the roots of plants deep down in, and they were smoldering, waiting for another kind of blowing the wick on the candle that's not completely out, and it flared up, and they were warned that it would do that, and they didn't do anything. Shocker. I guess I would say, wow, you mean to tell me that in Karen Bass's Los Angeles, the fire department knew that the fire was still smoldering and didn't take efforts to put it completely out?
Newsom governs for applause, not for results. He describes Newsom as a politician shaped by elite insulation.
That would be like the mayor being in Uganda or somewhere when she was in fire season. That would be like the LA County forbidding people to clear the brush that was tinder for fires right next to their home. That would be like the deputy mayor being under house arrest for phoning in a bomb threat. That would be like the head of the Water and Power Agency letting a 1 million gallon plus reservoir be dry for months. That would be crucial. That would be like the fire department emphasizing DEI and letting hundreds of hydrants not being worked. Gosh, that's what it would be like. So when you talk to people in Los Angeles, I talked to a couple of people in the Pepperdine area about it.
Raised inside wealth, schooled within privilege, protected by networks of influence.
They're beyond shock any little idealism that when Trump came out and he said they were going to get this done quickly, and then Gavin said we're going to greenlight this, they're so cynical. They knew that was a lie, that they're going to try to re-engineer the neighborhood through selective zoning. And I say selective zoning and re-engineer in the terms of they'll have a whole new slate of environmental. This is recycled sheetrock. These shingles have to be made by people who were gay or something like that. They're going to do all of that, and then they're going to say we can't have too many single-family, plutocratic. Can't have too many houses that are kind of like where Karen Bass is living in the mayor's mansion. Can't have anybody else having that. We're going to make high-density, portable. That's what they're going to do. But everybody's cynical when you say that. It's never going to happen. I don't want to go back and look at the 2020 elections especially, but there's some developments in the news this week that suggest that we might. Remember, the left said that anybody who had doubts about the balloting or the procedures or the change in laws of voting in 2020 was an election denialist. And they always cited Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood, kind of conspiracy theorists, that were saying computers were communicating with China or Venezuela. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about the fact that in 2020, 158 million people voted. 4 years later, only 155. That's only happened, I think, 2 or 3 times in American history where 4 years later, fewer people voted. But the country grew by 11 million people. So that was kind of odd that we went from a 11 million increase in population, but we decreased by 3 million voters. The other thing that was very odd was that traditionally we only had about 40% of people voting before Election Day, either through mail-in balloting or early balloting. And that was very apparent in 2018 when a traditional 35 to 40%, depending on the state, did not vote on Election Day. But given the changes that were democratically inspired, on Election Day in 2020, 70% of the people had already voted, and about 55 to 60% of those, even higher in some states, were Democrats. Now that we've seen in the first 8 weeks of the Trump administration a 96% reduction in illegal entries across the southern border, and this was done, remember, without the supposed need for comprehensive, quote-unquote, immigration reform, it's logical to ask what the last 4 years were about. Why did we have a completely open border? Why did 12 million people come into the United States from all over the world under illegal auspices? What was the reason? Why would people do that? And remember, right now, the United States has somewhere between 50 and 60 million residents that were not born in the United States. 27% of the population of California is foreign born, of all statuses, citizen, legal, illegal. That's an enormous challenge in assimilation, acculturation, integration. And we're not doing that, of course. But why would we do that? Why would we have 16% now of the population of the United States is foreign born? What was the rationale behind that, especially in the context of illegal entries? Looking back, what were the Democrats, what was Biden, what were the handlers of Biden thinking? I suppose they thought that maybe people who were coming in without English, without high school diplomas for the most part, without capital and without skills would be dependent on federal largesse. I know you're going to say, well, people who are not here legally cannot get Medicaid. Well, they can get Medicaid in emergency. In California, anybody can get Medicaid, which we here call Medi-Cal. So many people came in illegally and got on Medi-Cal that the system is broke. It's $6.7 billion in the hole. 50% of the population of all births are on Medi-Cal, and 40% of the California resident population are on Medi-Cal. So was the idea to get people dependent on the government, and then that would make government grow and more redistribution and more higher taxes, a way of what? Having equity, taking from the small, supposed greedy elite and making them pay higher taxes to fund this social welfare? Or was it utopianism, globalism, 21st centuryism, end of the worldism, in which you think that borders are a 19th century construct? We're all people of the same planet, as we see in Europe. So let's just get rid of borders. Let's make it everything from Yucatan to the Arctic Circle. We can just go anywhere we want in this utopian dream. So there was changes that we really didn't ponder at the time, and we haven't fully absorbed yet. But here's what I'm getting at. This week, a former Pfizer executive who now works for a British pharmaceutical company, GSK, was accused by former employees that had worked for him when he was CEO, or I shouldn't say CEO, in charge of the vaccine program at Pfizer. And their accusation, they took notes during meetings, so it's documented. And even the DOJ under Trump now is looking at it. But here was their narrative, that Pfizer for months had said the results of their early testing of the efficacy and the safety of the Pfizer spike protein anti-COVID vaccine was known. And they were going to announce it sometime between early October and late October. And I remember this. I wrote a column about it. And then something magical happened. There were people on the Pfizer board, allegedly, that put pressure to delay the announcement. And delay the announcement they did. In other words, Donald Trump was saying that we have done something no one else has done. We have given certain concessions, in retrospect, wisely or unwisely, to Moderna and Pfizer. And they, under Operation Warp Speed, we have a vaccine that they claim is 100%. It was not. Guarantee about either being infected or infectious. And they delayed it. Why did they delay it? Because they did not want Donald Trump to be able to say on election day, I got the vaccine. They wanted Joe Biden to say after the election, only then did it come. In fact, so profound was that about face that Joe Biden actually said that no one had been vaccinated when he became president. That was a complete lie, because after the election, when Pfizer thought that Donald Trump was safely defeated, they announced it. And then in November, December, and January, 17 million people were vaccinated.
Or we're looking at pictures of people landing, and we all support legitimate refugees coming, but they are arriving in bases without any requirement as foreign nationals to be vaccinated by troops who have a deadline that they have to be vaccinated. And so, or where I live, we have school board elections now where people who are not U.S. citizens can vote. Or all of the traditional privileges of citizenship. Only citizens could leave the United States at will with a passport. That no longer applies. Citizens usually were the people who were eligible for state services. That no longer applies. Citizens alone could hold office. That is still there. We need to get with it. And you can see that when Anthony Blinken, our current Secretary of State, says that the UN should come in and investigate us. I could go on, but that's a very dangerous idea. Globalization was wonderful in giving Western consumer products, medicines, all over the world, but the idea that you would take the next step and harmonize political norms and institutions outside the United States that are far inferior is really dangerous. Well, Barack Obama, you remember, he had said on 2 occasions, I believe we're exceptional like the Greeks or the British. In other words, everybody believes there are. But he made no effort to quantify that in a dispassionate, empirical fashion. As a classical historian or military historian, I always say to myself, what makes a society powerful? How do they project power beyond, and I don't mean just military, cultural or political or social. There's only about 6 things. One is fuel, transportation. In the horse age, do they have big planes where horses can graze, or they have wagons, or do they have early steam engines? In our case, we're the largest producer of gas and oil in the world. I know that Joe Biden's cut 3 million barrels off, but we still are.
Why is somebody who was born in Chiapas or Oaxaca or Michoacan to dire poverty and cartels and corruption, why doesn't he get the chance of somebody who's born in Malibu? Well, as social architects, maybe the left thought he should have the chance, so we'll just destroy the border. Or a third reason, why was it more sinister? Did they think that after 2020, when the majority of states changed the balloting laws to such a degree that earlier mail-in and early voting had only constituted 30% of those who voted. 70% voted on election day. Now 70% of all American voters do not vote on election day. They don't go before somebody and show a driver's license. Did they think under this system they could bring in 12 million people and in some cases they could vote? Now that's a very controversial topic. The left says that they never do vote. I'm not suggesting that they do in numbers, although I will suggest that although it's illegal at the state, most states, but it's absolutely illegal at the federal level. 16 local jurisdictions allow illegal aliens to vote in city council, school board elections, local referenda. It's a trend that the left is trying to cultivate in mind. So do they think that eventually the more people you bring in, so you have 50 or 60 million people who were not born in the United States, they're going to be a constituency, and equity being what it is and parity being, they deserve to vote? Was that the long-term goal? Or was it a fourth reason, just simple nihilism, chaos? People were angry at the Trump years, or they're angry at traditional America. They think it's racist and sexist. It doesn't provide diversity or equity and inclusion. So what we're going to do is just flood the zone. 12 million people, and we'll see how you like it. We're going to put them in hotels in New York. We're going to send them to the inner city. Well, we're not going to send them to Malibu or Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, but we're just going to flood the zone and just make so much chaos that you'll have to deal with it. Sort of like California. Deal with it. I don't have the answer. I don't know what was behind it, but I do know that never in the history of the United States, within 4 years, did the government, by intent, destroy the border, welcome in 12 million people during a first year of a COVID lockdown where all of us had to be very careful, wear masks, and have proof of vaccination, with no audit of all of people who were not here. It's inexplicable. And it's so inexplicable that I'm going to end today with I don't have any answers other than providing the possible choices and alternatives I outlined. There was a lot of very strange things. Remember the Hunter Biden laptop? Anthony Blinken, Mike Morrell, the former CIA interim director, they got 51 people right before the October 23rd debate to lie. And they knew it was a lie because the FBI had authenticated the laptop to say that the laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And we know from a albeit conservative poll, Technometrica, that affected 8 out of 10 people who were polled votes. That was a stunning thing to do. And then in addition to that, the FBI was inserting agents into the social media network at Facebook and Twitter, and their job was to censor the news. What Molly Ball in her Time essay said was to suppress disinformation and misinformation. What am I getting at? This week's story about Pfizer sort of confirms what a lot of us said, that the news of the vaccination was deliberately manipulated and delayed so it would not give credit to Donald Trump before the final 30 or 40% of the ballots were cast. And that was a pattern that we saw with the FBI working hand in glove with social media and as well as the government in the guise of Anthony Blinken, who at the time was working for Biden and would be Secretary of State, rounding up ex-government officials. And they were not ex in every case. Some of these 51 authorities were still contractors. Bottom line, the problem wasn't computers sending out signals or fake computer ballot totals. The problem was that we radically changed the voting laws. We denied we did in some ways. We did it for partisan purposes. We manipulated the news. And now we learn that even pharmaceutical companies were massaging the results of their test to hurt Donald Trump's chances in the 2020 election.